I'm an associate professor at the University of Oslo, where I lead the Intermedia Researcher Group at the Department of Education. Intermedia research focuses on the role of design and on the role and design of digital technologies to support learning and meaning-making in different contexts, in museums, in workplace, and in schools. And I say this to prepare you because, in contrast to many of the other very exciting presentations we've seen here so far, I am not an exhibition designer, and I do not have any fancy presentations of sophisticated technologies to share. Rather, I will be focusing on the visitor's experience and the ways in which social media may be designed to engage young people in meaning-making experiences in an art museum. So the topic of social media in museum communication and education practices is, of course, quite broad, with many different aims and assumptions and approaches for all the different participants and stakeholders. From the museum's perspective, there might be an institutional interest in including and engaging new audiences. Designers look at social media as a means of stimulating interest, inviting participation, and creating engagement. And visitors may have a personal interest in sharing experiences and opinions and knowledge. So in this study, I zoom in on visitor engagement to better understand how it may be conceived and supported through social media designs. The data I will present is still being analyzed. It's a fairly large corpus and very complex project. It's a small part of a larger research project called Contact, a 4-year national research project that is just ending. Our collaboration in the project was with many different kinds of museums, and in this study it is in collaboration with the National Museum of Art, Architecture and Design in Oslo. And our method of collaboration in the project was to work closely with our museum partners and to identify existing problems in practice that they themselves identified, and then to develop through conversation and meetings shared areas of interest from both a research perspective and from the museum's practice perspective. In this case, the museum wanted to incorporate more text and educational resources in their famous Monk Room at the National Gallery building. They are also designing a new building and wanted to develop their own skills and approaches to thinking about technologies and integrating them in gallery experiences. So in this picture you see here, oops, I wasn't supposed to do that. In this picture you see when we first met with the museum, this was their experiment, I'm trying to get it here, was to experiment and do a study going from labels from this big to this big. And through our collaboration, we introduced this notion of multimodality and different kinds of platforms and content, digital content. And we're given a project room, which is right around the corner from the Monk room, as an experimental research lab. And we developed 4 different interactives based on their existing educational practices. And these are 4 stations that are called Perspective on Monk and his artistic production, called Myself, My Media, My Place, and My Friends. And I will describe 2 of these interactives, which are the topic of the study, more fully in a minute. And just briefly on the research methods, the project room was in place for 2 months. There was a team of 3 researchers doing video recordings mainly. We have about 44 hours of video data looking at different aspects of the interactions. The adolescent visitors, which was the focus for the Contact project, we employed a range of different methods to get out of the kind of school visit operation or modus. So we did some snowball methods and of recruitment, and we also did observations of the general public and school field trips. And this data was supplemented with field notes and semi-structured interviews, the visitor-generated content, and log data. And interaction analysis and multimodal analysis are the main methods we use. But first, before I present the data, in light of all of the interest in engagement that social media is supposed to support, it is perhaps useful to first take a look at how we are framing engagement in our analysis of young people's interactions. In a review of recent research on engagement, Lawson and Lawson and the, I think it's the AERA, I have the reference at the end, consider the broad range of perspectives and theories that have studied indicators of cognitive engagement, behavioral engagement, and how these play into states of experience in different temporal and sociocultural contexts. Aspects of engagement are observable in attention and in the ways that people act, orient, and position themselves during activities in different settings. Some studies argue that engagement is to some extent predictable based on individual prior knowledge and experience. In this study I will present today, we are exploring how perspectives on sociocultural acts of engagement may be applied in the analysis of young people's activities and interactions at these different stations. At the micro level of as they participate, we can say that that the interactions are experienced as in keeping with the visitors' identities as art viewers in this case, or perhaps as having science interests. Another sociocultural aspect of engagement is this notion of cultural relevance, for example, that their engagement with the discipline of art or science may have personal significance, perhaps more related to their general academic skills or their interests in science and art. And finally, there is this notion of cultural correspondence, a little bit more of a meta kind of perspective in the research on engagement, where the situated activity kind of activates or connects with experiences in the cultural contexts, otherwise or previous experiences to museums. Okay. So social media was not a main design factor in the way we thought about the kinds of engagement we were trying to foster in these different stations. So I have two examples of that illustrate quite different ways of how social media is both foregrounded and backgrounded in the pedagogical design. So the first example from the Myself Interactive aims to engage visitors in exploring monks' self-portraits through close looking and dialogue. And since we have such short time, I'm just going to play the clip because I think the interaction is self-explanatory rather than explaining the actual design interaction. Oh, I have to put on this, sorry. I have a sound. Has this terrible hum, so.
It's this piece. No. Yeah.
So what she just did there at the end was to press the save to the Flickr website on the National Museum's website. And that visualization of their picture where they're posing like monk is also on a screen when they enter the room. So people are quite aware that when they participate in this activity, it's going to be shown if they choose to share it. It's so annoying. So from the sociocultural aspects of engagement then, we can say that they, oh, I have the wrong slide there. Sorry. We can say that these selfies, they spur social interaction. The self-portrait poses are acceptable content to share on Flickr. We see this in all the data that there's very little discussion about whether this is something they want to share or not. They pretty much all do it and send it also to their emails. And we also see here that the focus of the design is on the embodied interaction and interpretation, and so the role of Flickr is secondary. And at the same time, through these other representations of this stream, they're also very aware that they're contributing to this dialogical stream of posing interpretations on the museum website. And so now I want to show the second activity, which is called My Friends. It involves a Twitter example, use of Twitter. And the table is designed so that there are biographies of Munch's friends, the Christiane Bohème artists in particular. And these artists, the biographies, they had written a manifesto called the 9 Commandments. They're quite subversive and challenging the kind of Norwegian mentality at the time, which is very focused on coming out of this national romantic movement. And I haven't translated these, but I just want to point out, as you'll see in the data, these 2 particular commandments that they write. And the one is, you shall hate and despise all farmers, such as Stjerne Bjørnsen, Christopher Christoffersen, og Kolbenstvedt. And the last of the commandments is, du skal ta livet av deg, which is translated directly as, you shall kill yourself, you shall take your own life. But it also has this other interpretation as, you shall take your own life, kind of in the same spirit as the first one, you shall write your own life. So I have a short clip. I have to go out of this, unfortunately. And here we see a group of students. And this was not uncommon kind of interactions. We can talk about that at the end.
I don't care, I'm making my own.
Let's start at the beginning here.
I want to write it in nynorsk. No.
Right, and the idea, if I didn't mention, was to write, they're supposed to tweet their own commandment for their own friends using the iPad Twitter.
Oh.
You know they were posting nynorsk.
I don't care, I'm making my own.
Hey, you can't write like a beat. Nynorsk. Doesn't work that way. Like, I hate nynorsk and then you write.
No, I like nynorsk. No, you say levar eller lever?
Lever.
Lever?
It's silly though. They hated nynorsk. Why would you're supposed
But
to
I
represent
like
them?
it.
But you're supposed to represent them.
No, I'm supposed to represent my friends.
No, you're
Or
supposed
me.
to
Yeah,
represent
it
that
says,
guy.
no, it says make a 10th, whatever, which suits your friends.
My friends.
Yeah. So you get an understanding of the kinds of discussions they were having. They sat there actually for 10 minutes and used all of the resources. So to sum up here then, I have to go back to the other slide that was out of sequence. We see that here we see that the visitors, they responded to tweeting as a means of participating in a relevant activity, that they wanted to invest time and attention in this activity. We see that it was that they have a lot of previous knowledge and they know a lot about Monk and some of the, had read some of the texts that were on the table, so that the texts and the pictures and the resources supported critical reflection and discussion and disciplinary engagement. You just see a small clip of this, though. And we also see that the social media here becomes a tool that mediates interpretation as one tool among many such tools one finds in museums. So I will just conclude. Because as we heard from Allegra yesterday, visitors use social media mainly for picture taking and sharing, and without prompts, tasks, or structures, the commenting that goes on is frankly pretty banal for those of us who have studied it, and hardly it seems worth the effort. And on the one hand, this is okay, as we want the focus to be on the museum experience and away from devices. At the same time, I would argue that museum educators are experts in the design of questions and prompts and activities that can support dialogue and debate and learning. And these experiences are the kind of lifelong learning engagement that museums, as cultural institutions and places of experience and meaning-making, also offer visitors, with or without social media. So the design of the task is not trivial. And finally, as we also saw yesterday, social media and technologies are increasingly designed to capture visitors' active engagement, as we do here, making data available that can be studied and shared over time. And as a learning researcher, I propose that such studies can provide insight into how such short-term engagement participation can become activated in other contexts. And this is an important contribution, I believe, that museum learning research can contribute to the learning sciences. Thank you.